A construction worker's jackhammer shattered the concrete floor of a summer camp dining hall, revealing what 6 years of massive search parties never could. The remains of Scoutmaster Gregory Thornton and his 5 young scouts, their merit badges still pinned to their uniforms where they lay entombed. In an interrogation room, the camp's quiet maintenance man, Victor Mercer, calmly confessed to the killings. But he insisted it wasn't murder. It was preservation. He had sealed the troop in the foundation to keep them as perfect examples of scouting forever. But the most shocking twist came from the original 2002 case file. A search dog had alerted to the freshly poured concrete just days after the disappearance. The camp director, desperate to protect his brand-new building from scandal, deliberately buried the report, leaving the boys and their leaders sealed in their tomb while the world searched for them in the wrong place.
If stories of unsolved mysteries keep you up at night, you're in the right place. Hit subscribe now so you don't miss our weekly deep dives into cases that defy explanation. Where are you watching from? Drop your location in the comments. I'm always fascinated to see how far these dark tales travel. And if you've ever been to a scout camp with strange rumors or history, share that below. Now let's return to the summer of 2002.
Camp Whispering Pines sits nestled in the dense forest of Ridgeback Mountains, roughly 30 miles from the nearest town of Pinecrest. The camp's isolation was part of its appeal. 360 acres of pristine wilderness bordered by a crystal-clear lake to the north and rugged terrain on all other sides. Established in 1956, the camp had become a beloved institution, hosting generations of young scouts who learned wilderness skills, leadership, and camaraderie beneath its towering pines. The summer of 2002 had been particularly significant for Camp Whispering Pines. After years of fundraising efforts, the camp had finally completed construction on a new dining hall, a sprawling cedar structure capable of seating 200 campers at once. The building stood as a proud achievement, its completion marked by a ribbon-cutting ceremony attended by local officials and generous donors just days before the summer session began. Scoutmaster Gregory Thornton stood at the center of this milestone. At 42, Thornton was the embodiment of scouting values, a former Marine who had found his calling guiding young men in the ways of self-reliance and outdoor survival. His military straight posture and neatly trimmed salt and pepper hair gave him an air of authority, but it was his patient demeanor and genuine interest in his scouts' development that earned him universal respect. Thornton had led Troop 426 for over 7 years, taking particular pride in his current group of scouts, who had shown exceptional promise. The 5 boys who made up the core of Troop 426 represented different backgrounds but shared a passion for scouting. Noah Patterson, 16, was the unofficial leader among the teens, tall, confident, and the son of the local high school principal. Noah wore his achievements proudly, his uniform sleeve heavy with merit badges that reflected his wide-ranging skills. Lucas Reeves, also 16, was Noah's closest friend and the troop's resident problem solver, with a quick mind that seemed to anticipate challenges before they arose. Dominic Foster, 15, was the newest member of the group, but had quickly proven himself with unmatched camping skills and a quiet determination. Alexander Walsh, also 15, was known for his inexhaustible energy and enthusiasm, documenting their adventures in a journal he carried everywhere. Benjamin Cruz, 14, was the youngest, but perhaps the most naturally talented, particularly in navigation and tracking. Together, the 5 boys formed a tight-knit unit that had accumulated more collective achievements than any other troop in the district. They functioned as a cohesive team, with each member's strengths complementing the others. Scoutmaster Thornton often remarked that this particular group of scouts reminded him of his Marine unit, diverse in skills but unified in purpose. The second weekend of July had been earmarked for a special overnight wilderness exercise. The troop would venture into a more remote section of the camp to practice advanced survival skills, constructing shelters, identifying edible plants, navigating by stars, and performing emergency first aid scenarios. It was to be the culmination of months of preparation, a chance for the boys to demonstrate their mastery before many of them would advance to Eagle Scout status in the fall. The weather that weekend was ideal for their expedition. Clear skies, with temperatures in the mid-70s during the day and comfortably cool at night. The forecast showed no signs of the storms that often rolled through the mountains in summer, promising perfect conditions for their overnight exercise. Camp Whispering Pines was operating at full capacity that week, with approximately 180 campers from various troops spread across the grounds. The camp was staffed by a team of 20 adults, including Director Harold Blackwood, a stern administrator who had overseen the camp for nearly 2 decades. Assistant Director Margot Fielding, who handled most of the day-to-day operations, and various activity coordinators for archery, swimming, crafts, and other programs. Less visible but equally important to the camp's functioning was the maintenance staff, led by Victor Mercer, a solitary man in his late 40s who had joined the camp staff 3 years earlier. Mercer was efficient but unremarkable, the kind of person whose presence was only noticed when something needed fixing. He had overseen much of the dining hall construction, working alongside the contractors to ensure the building met the camp's specific needs. On Friday, July 12, 2002, Scoutmaster Gregory Thornton and his 5 scouts gathered their equipment after the evening meal, watched by other campers who knew of their planned challenge. The mood was lighthearted and excited as they checked their supplies one final time on the steps of the new dining hall. Remember, this isn't just a camping trip. This is a test of everything you've learned, he told them, his voice carrying the measured authority that had guided them through countless adventures. The boys nodded solemnly, understanding the significance of the exercise. Alexander Walsh's father captured a photograph of the group standing proudly in front of the dining hall, their expressions a mix of excitement and determination. It would be the last confirmed image of Troop 426.
By all accounts, Scoutmaster Thornton and the 5 boys departed camp at approximately 7:15 p.m., heading west along a well-established trail that led deeper into the more remote areas of the property. They carried standard backpacks containing sleeping bags, water purification tablets, first aid kits, and minimal food supplies. The exercise was designed to test their ability to live off the land. Several campers and staff members reported seeing them leave, noting nothing unusual about their demeanor or equipment. The troop was expected to return by noon the following day, in time for the camp-wide lunch and afternoon activities. When they failed to appear by 12:30 p.m., their absence was initially met with mild concern rather than alarm. It wasn't uncommon for groups to run slightly behind schedule, particularly during skill-building exercises where the educational experience took precedence over rigid timetables. Assistant Director Fielding made the first inquiries, asking other scouts and staff if anyone had seen Troop 426 that morning. When these inquiries yielded no sightings, she dispatched 2 senior staff members to follow the trail and locate the group. The staff members returned 2 hours later with troubling news. They had found what appeared to be the troop's designated campsite, but it showed no signs of having been used the previous night. The ground was undisturbed, with no evidence of fire pits, shelter construction, or any human presence.
At 3:45 p.m., now genuinely concerned, Director Blackwood organized a more comprehensive search, dividing available staff into teams to cover the western section of the camp property. As daylight began to fade, with no sign of the missing troop, Blackwood made the decision to contact the local sheriff's department. The disappearance of 6 people, 5 minors, and an adult without a trace was unprecedented in the camp's history. Sheriff Raymond Donovan arrived at Camp Whispering Pines at 7:20 p.m. with 4 deputies. By this time, the parents of the missing scouts had been notified, and several were already making the drive to the camp, their minds racing with worst-case scenarios. Sheriff Donovan, a veteran of numerous search and rescue operations in the rugged terrain surrounding Pinecrest, immediately recognized the urgency of the situation. "We're losing daylight. I need to know exactly where they were headed and what they were planning to do." The information was frustratingly vague. Scoutmaster Thornton had filed a general plan indicating they would be in the western quadrant of the property, but the specific location of their overnight camp had been left deliberately unspecified. Part of the navigation exercise was for the boys to select an appropriate site using their training. The search teams found nothing that evening except for a single scout whistle discovered approximately a half-mile down the trail. The whistle was identified as belonging to Benjamin Cruz, the youngest member of the troop, but its presence raised more questions than answers. Had it been dropped accidentally or deliberately left as a marker? Was it evidence of a hasty departure or something more sinister? As darkness fell completely, weather conditions suddenly deteriorated. A fast-moving storm system, unexpected and severe, brought heavy rain and gusting winds that forced the search teams back to the main camp. The storm seemed to appear from nowhere, catching even experienced outdoorsmen by surprise. The timing could not have been worse for the search effort, as the downpour would wash away tracks, scatter evidence, and dramatically reduce visibility. The parents who had arrived at the camp gathered in the new dining hall, the very building in front of which their sons had last been photographed. Their faces were drawn with worry as Sheriff Donovan addressed them, explaining the measures being taken and the plans for a full-scale search at first light. Miranda Patterson, Noah's mother, clutched her son's spare uniform shirt that had been left in his cabin. "He knows these woods. They all do. This doesn't make sense." By dawn on Sunday, July 14th, the storm had passed, but it had left the search area significantly altered. Streams were swollen, trails were muddy and partially washed out, and debris was scattered throughout the forest. Nevertheless, a massive search operation began at first light, now bolstered by state police, professional search and rescue teams with dogs, and dozens of volunteers from Pinecrest and surrounding communities. The search teams discovered the troop's intended campsite, identified by markers consistent with Scoutmaster Thornton's training methods, but found it completely undisturbed. It appeared the troop had never reached their destination. The area between the camp and the intended site was searched inch by inch, but no equipment, no clothing, no signs of struggle, and no human traces were found except for the single whistle discovered the previous evening. As days stretched into weeks, the search expanded far beyond the boundaries of Camp Whispering Pines. Helicopter sweeps, drone surveillance, and teams of volunteers covered miles of wilderness. Missing person posters featuring the faces of Scoutmaster Thornton and the 5 boys were distributed throughout the state. National media picked up the story, bringing widespread attention to the baffling disappearance. The investigation began to focus on multiple theories. The first and most straightforward was that the group had become lost and met with some accident in the wilderness. But this theory has significant flaws. Scoutmaster Thornton was highly experienced. The weather had been clear until after they were reported missing, and the area, while rugged, was within the boundaries of a well-established camp. Moreover, the complete absence of any equipment or personal effects made this scenario increasingly implausible. A second theory emerged that the group had encountered hostile wildlife, perhaps a bear or mountain lion. Again, the lack of any physical evidence, no blood, no torn clothing, no signs of struggle, made this unlikely.
Attention inevitably turned to Scoutmaster Thornton himself. Could he have engineered the disappearance? Investigators delved into his background, examining his military service, financial records, personal relationships, and psychological history. They found a man of impeccable character, decorated Marine service, stable finances, and a 20-year marriage to his high school sweetheart. Interviews with former scouts, parents, colleagues, and friends painted a consistent picture of a man devoted to mentoring young men. Nothing in his history suggested any capacity for harming the boys in his care. Nevertheless, the possibility of foul play could not be dismissed. The investigation expanded to include background checks on all camp staff, with particular attention to any who had direct contact with Troop 426 in the days leading up to their disappearance. Sheriff Donovan's team interviewed every camper and staff member present that weekend, compiling a complex timeline of sightings and interactions. Two teenage campers from another troop reported hearing what they described as metal banging sounds late Friday night, but they had assumed it was related to kitchen preparations in the new dining hall. A junior counselor mentioned seeing headlights near the maintenance shed around midnight, but since the maintenance staff often worked odd hours, he hadn't thought it significant enough to report until specifically asked. Search dogs had initially tracked the troop's scent along the Western Trail before losing it approximately a mile from camp. Curiously, one dog had repeatedly returned to the area around the dining hall, showing interest in the ground near the building's foundation. The handler had attributed this to the recent construction activity and the presence of unfamiliar chemicals in the soil. This detail was noted but not pursued further in the initial investigation, a decision that would later prove to be a critical oversight. As weeks passed without any significant developments, media attention gradually waned. The search area had been expanded to its practical limits, and resources began to be redirected. For the families of the missing scouts and their community, the lack of answers was its own special torment. Robert Cruz, Benjamin's father, refused to leave the search area. "My son is out there," he told reporters, his voice hoarse from calling his son's name through the forest for weeks. "He's waiting for us to find him." The case generated numerous tips and alleged sightings from across the country, each one methodically investigated and ultimately discarded. A waitress in Arizona believed she had served Thornton and two of the boys at her diner. A gas station attendant in Oregon reported seeing teenagers matching the descriptions of the missing scouts. A hiker in Colorado found a backpack he thought might be connected to the case. Each lead was pursued with initial hope that quickly gave way to disappointment. By the 6-month mark, the active search had been officially suspended, though the case remained open. Camp Whispering Pines, its reputation severely damaged by the tragedy, closed for the remainder of the 2002 season and reopened the following summer with dramatically reduced attendance. New security measures were implemented, including GPS trackers for all groups leaving the main camp area, stricter check-in procedures, and increased staff presence on trails. For the families left behind, life was measured in painful milestones, birthdays that went uncelebrated, graduations that never occurred, holidays marked by empty chairs. They formed a support group, meeting monthly to share their grief and their increasingly desperate search for answers. Each year, on the anniversary of the disappearance, they held a memorial service at the camp, keeping the memory of their sons alive and the case in the public consciousness. 6 years passed.
Camp Whispering Pines struggled to recover from the shadow cast by the disappearances. Enrollment remained well below 2002 levels, despite the camp administration's best efforts to rebuild its reputation. In a bid to revitalize the facility and attract new campers, the board of directors approved a comprehensive renovation plan in early 2008, focusing particularly on modernizing the dining hall that had become a somber reminder of the tragedy. The renovation began in March 2008, during the off-season when the camp was empty except for essential maintenance staff. The project included updating the kitchen equipment, improving the heating and cooling systems, and replacing the worn concrete floor with more attractive and durable materials. On March 23, 2008, a construction crew was working on removing the existing concrete floor in the dining hall. Raymond Alvarez, a 32-year-old construction worker, was operating a jackhammer near the western corner of the building when his equipment broke through what should have been a solid slab and sank unexpectedly into a void beneath. "It was weird," Alvarez would later tell investigators. "The concrete was thinner there, maybe half as thick as the rest of the floor, and when I broke through, there was this space underneath." Alvarez shut off his equipment and knelt to examine the unusual depression. Using his flashlight to peer into the darkness, he spotted something that didn't belong. A flash of fabric, indistinguishable from construction materials. He reached into the hole and carefully extracted what appeared to be a piece of cloth. As it emerged into the light, the nature of the object became horrifyingly clear. It was a Scout merit badge, still attached to a fragment of uniform. Alvarez immediately halted all work and contacted his supervisor, who in turn called the sheriff's office. Within an hour, Sheriff Donovan, still in office 6 years after the original investigation, arrived at the scene with a team of deputies and forensic specialists.
The construction equipment was removed, and a methodical excavation of the area began. As workers carefully removed more of the concrete, a grim tableau was revealed. Beneath the section of the dining hall floor, approximately 15 feet by 10 feet, human remains were discovered, partially preserved by the dry, sealed environment created by the concrete above. The remains were not scattered randomly, but appeared to have been deliberately arranged. 6 bodies, 1 adult and 5 adolescents, were positioned side by side, each still partially clothed in degraded but recognizable Scout uniforms. The badges and insignia, protected from complete decomposition by the synthetic materials, provided immediate, heartbreaking identification. These were the missing members of Troop 426. The forensic team worked with painstaking care to document and recover every fragment of evidence. The bodies were removed individually, each transferred with somber respect to the county medical examiner's facility. The process took 3 full days, during which the camp was declared a crime scene and sealed off from public access. The discovery sent shockwaves through the community and reignited national media interest in the case. For the families of the victims, the news brought a complex mixture of emotions, the devastating confirmation of their worst fears alongside a measure of relief that the uncertainty was finally over. "We've been living in this terrible limbo," said Teresa Reeves, Lucas's mother, her voice breaking during a brief statement to the press. "Part of me has been waiting for my son to walk through the door for 6 years. Now at least we know." The medical examiner's preliminary findings were grim. All 6 victims had died from blunt force trauma to the head, likely inflicted by a heavy instrument such as a hammer or pry bar. The attack had been swift and methodical, with evidence suggesting the victims had been subdued or unconscious when the fatal blows were delivered. Trace evidence of a sedative was found in the preserved tissue, indicating they may have been drugged before being killed. Most disturbing was the timeline revealed by the forensic analysis.
Based on the decomposition rate in the sealed environment and other factors, the medical examiner estimated that the victims had been killed and entombed in the concrete within 24 hours of their departure from camp, long before they had been reported missing or any search had begun. This revelation completely transformed the investigation. The wilderness search, the theories about accidents or wildlife encounters, the possibility of the group becoming lost, all were rendered irrelevant by the horrific truth. Troop 426 had never left the immediate vicinity of the camp. They had been murdered and concealed literally underfoot, while hundreds searched the surrounding wilderness in vain. The investigation shifted to the focus of the construction of the dining hall itself. Records showed that the building had been completed just 3 days before the summer session began, with the concrete floor being one of the final elements installed. The timing was critical. The floor had been poured only 5 days before Troop 426 disappeared. Sheriff Donovan assembled a new investigative team, bringing in state police detectives and FBI agents specializing in cold cases. They began by examining the construction records for the dining hall project, identifying everyone who had access to the site during the critical period. The construction had been managed by a local company, Mountain Ridge Contractors, but involved numerous subcontractors and day laborers. Payroll records, work orders, and daily logs were scrutinized to create a comprehensive list of everyone who had access to the site during the critical period. Investigators revisited the original case files with new perspective, looking for previously overlooked connections. The strange behavior of the search dog that had shown interest in the dining hall area now took on profound significance. The reports of metal banging sounds heard by campers on the night of the disappearance were re-examined in light of what must have been occurring beneath the dining hall. A breakthrough came when investigators discovered discrepancies in the maintenance records for the camp vehicles. According to the logs, none of the camp's trucks or utility vehicles had been used on the night of July 12, 2002. However, the fuel logs showed that the maintenance department's primary truck had been refueled on July 13, having used nearly a full tank overnight, inconsistent with the vehicle supposedly remaining parked. This discrepancy led investigators to take a closer look at the maintenance department and its director, Victor Mercer. Initial background checks during the original investigation had revealed nothing suspicious about Mercer. He had provided the statement in 2002 indicating that he had been off duty the evening of the disappearance, claiming that he had driven to Pinecrest to purchase supplies and then returned to his on-site cabin where he spent the night alone, a statement that no one had been able to corroborate or contradict at the time.
A deeper examination of Mercer's history now revealed troubling inconsistencies. He had provided Camp Whispering Pines with references from previous employers that, when contacted again in 2008, denied having written them. His claimed experience working at youth camps in neighboring states could not be verified. Most significantly, he had listed a non-existent address as his previous residence. The investigation also uncovered that Mercer had left Camp Whispering Pines abruptly in late 2002, just months after the disappearance. He had cited family issues requiring his relocation, but no forwarding address had been provided. Camp records showed he had been paid through the end of the year despite his sudden departure, an unusual arrangement approved by Director Blackwood, who had described it as compassionate leave. As investigators tried to trace Mercer's movements after leaving Camp Whispering Pines, they discovered he had worked at 3 other youth camps and recreation centers across different states, each time staying approximately 12 to 18 months before moving on. In each case, he had left without providing clear reasons or future contact information. The emerging pattern was deeply troubling, suggesting a transient individual deliberately obscuring his history while maintaining proximity to young people. Yet without physical evidence linking him to the murders, the case against Mercer remained circumstantial. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. An anonymous tip was called in to the sheriff's office following the news coverage of the discovered remains. The caller identified himself only as a former employee of Mountain Ridge Contractors who had worked on the dining hall project. "You need to know something about that floor. It wasn't supposed to be poured that weekend. It was scheduled for the following Tuesday, but Mercer insisted it had to be done immediately. He said there had been a change in the camp schedule and the building needed to be ready sooner. He offered to supervise the pour himself, said he'd handle the finishing work. It seemed odd at the time, but he was the client's rep, so we did what he asked." This information was the missing piece that connected Mercer directly to the crime scene. Records confirmed that the concrete pour had indeed been rescheduled at the last minute, ostensibly at the camp administration's request, but Director Blackwood, when questioned, had no knowledge of any such schedule change. Armed with this new information, investigators obtained warrants to track down Victor Mercer, who was now working as a maintenance supervisor at a children's summer camp in a neighboring state. They also secured a warrant to search his current residence. The search of Mercer's small cabin near his latest workplace yielded disturbing evidence. Hidden in a locked chest in his bedroom, investigators discovered a collection of Scout memorabilia, merit badges, patches, pins, and neckerchiefs that appeared to have been taken from multiple sources over many years. More damning was a journal containing detailed entries about various Scout troops, with particular focus on certain boys who had caught Mercer's attention. The entries included dating back months before their disappearance. Mercer had observed them during previous visits to Camp Whispering Pines, noting their skills, personalities, and specifically mentioning their exemplary nature. The entries became increasingly obsessive, describing the boys as perfect specimens and true scouts who deserved to be preserved. The final entries from July 2002 were chilling in their detached, methodical description of the murders. Mercer had approached Scoutmaster Thornton just after the troop's departure, claiming there was an urgent maintenance issue with a water line near their planned route. He asked Thornton to bring the boys to help, appealing to their sense of duty and presenting it as an opportunity to demonstrate their emergency response skills. Once he had lured them to the maintenance shed, Mercer had offered them drinks laced with powerful sedatives. When they were unconscious, he had killed them one by one with methodical precision using a framing hammer. He had then used the camp truck to transport their bodies to the dining hall, where the partially completed floor provided the perfect concealment opportunity. Mercer was arrested without incident on April 2, 2008. When confronted with the evidence from his journal and the forensic findings, he showed little emotion. His demeanor during questioning was described by FBI agents as unnervingly calm and detached, as if discussing events that had happened to someone else. During formal interrogation, Mercer provided a full confession, filling in the details of how he had carried out the murders and concealment. His explanation for the crime revealed a deeply disturbed mind. He claimed he had preserved the Scouts at the peak of their achievement, sealing them within the heart of the camp they loved. To his mind, they were the best Scouts he'd ever seen. They deserved to be remembered that way, not to grow up and become ordinary. The investigation expanded to examine possible connections between Mercer and unsolved cases in other states where he had worked.
While no definitive links were established to other murders, authorities in 2 states reopened investigations into the disappearances of young people at or near camps where Mercer had been employed. Mercer's background investigation revealed a troubled history that had somehow escaped detection during his employment screening. As a child, he had desperately wanted to join the Scouts, but had been prevented by his abusive father. As a young adult, he had applied to become a Scout leader, but had been rejected due to concerning responses during the interview process. These rejections had apparently fueled an obsession with Scouting that had twisted into something monstrous over time.
Victor Mercer was charged with 6 counts of first-degree murder. The evidence against him was overwhelming. His detailed confession, the journal entries describing the crimes, and the forensic evidence recovered from the scene left no room for doubt about his guilt. The trial, which began in September 2008, was relatively brief. Mercer's public defenders, recognizing the insurmountable evidence, focused on arguing that their client was mentally ill and therefore not fully responsible for his actions. Psychiatric evaluations presented conflicting views of Mercer's mental state. While he clearly harbored delusional beliefs about preserving the Scouts, he had demonstrated clear premeditation, awareness of wrongdoing through his elaborate concealment efforts, and the capacity to function normally in society for years afterward. The trial deliberated for less than 6 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all counts. At the sentencing hearing, family members of the victims were given the opportunity to address both the court and the man who had stolen their children from them. David Walsh, Alexander's father, spoke while holding his son's journal that had been recovered from the cabin where the boys had been staying. Our son wrote in this journal every day. His last entry was about how excited he was for the overnight trip. He wrote that he couldn't wait to see what his future in Scouting would bring. You stole that future. You stole everything. Miranda Patterson, clutching the photograph taken of the troop in front of the dining hall, addressed Mercer directly. You thought you were preserving them? You destroyed them. You destroyed us. There is nothing noble or preserving about what you did. It was selfish and evil and unforgivable. Mercer showed no visible reaction to their statements, maintaining the same detached demeanor he had displayed throughout the proceedings. When offered the chance to speak before sentencing, he declined. The judge sentenced Victor Mercer to 6 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole, ensuring he would never again have the opportunity to harm another child. As he was led from the courtroom, the families of Troop 426 stood together, united in their grief, but finally granted the closure that had eluded them for 6 long years. In the aftermath of the trial, Camp Whispering Pines faced difficult decisions about its future. The dining hall was demolished, the ground beneath it consecrated as a memorial site. A circular garden was established, with 6 granite markers arranged around a central flagpole that flew the Scout flag at half-mast. Each marker bore the name, dates, and achievements of one of the victims, celebrating their lives rather than focusing on their deaths. The case prompted nationwide reviews of hiring practices at youth camps and Scouting organizations. Background check procedures were strengthened, reference verification became more rigorous, and staff supervision protocols were enhanced. The tragedy at Camp Whispering Pines became a case study in child protection, with many organizations implementing what became known as Fortin protocols, named after the scoutmaster who had died protecting his troop. For the investigators who had worked the case from its beginning, the resolution brought mixed emotions. Sheriff Donovan, who retired shortly after Mercer's sentencing, later admitted that the guilt of having missed crucial evidence in 2002 would haunt him for the rest of his life. "We were looking in the wrong direction," he said in a rare interview years later. "We were searching the wilderness while they were right there beneath our feet. That's something I'll never fully make peace with." The families of Troop 426 eventually established a foundation in their sons' names, providing scholarships and outdoor education opportunities for disadvantaged youth. They remained connected by their shared experience, supporting each other through the painful milestones that continued to mark the passage of time. The high school graduations that never happened, the college acceptances that never came, the weddings and careers and lives that would remain forever unlived. Camp Whispering Pines ultimately reopened under a new name and management, with a renewed commitment to safety and a solemn promise to honor the memory of those lost. The story of Troop 426 became part of the orientation for all new staff members, not to sensationalize the tragedy, but to ensure that the lessons learned from it would never be forgotten. Perhaps the most powerful legacy of the case was the way it changed how missing persons investigations are conducted. The assumption that missing hikers or campers must be lost in the wilderness was replaced by a more comprehensive approach that examines all possibilities from the outset. Search perimeters now routinely include the points of origin, and cadaver dogs are standard components of search operations even when an accident is the presumed cause of disappearance. The case of the vanished scout troop stands as a stark reminder that sometimes the answers we seek are not in distant, uncharted territories, but in the familiar places we pass by every day, hidden in plain sight beneath a thin veneer of normalcy that conceals the darkest of human capacities. For those who visit the memorial garden at the former Camp Whispering Pines, the 6 granite markers stand as testaments not just to lives cut tragically short, but to the enduring impact of those lives on the world they left behind. Scoutmaster Gregory Thornton, Noah Patterson, Lucas Reeves, Dominic Foster, Alexander Walsh, and Benjamin Cruz remain forever frozen in that last photograph. Young, proud, full of promise, a troop that never returned from their final journey, but who, in their absence, changed the landscape of child safety forever.